Let's do that hockey.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dobber Prospects Radio, episode 130. I'm your host, Peter Harling, and today's episode is going to be the 2022 NHL Entry Draft Fantasy Rankings. Now, some of you, like myself, might have already completed your Prospects Fantasy Draft in your Dynasty Leagues. Some of you have not. So for those of you who have not, this could be really beneficial for you. And I really enjoyed the draft, and I hope you enjoyed all of the draft content that I had from the draft on the last couple episodes. And while I was at the draft, I had the pleasure of meeting up with Hadi Kalakeche, who joins me now. He is a Dobber Prospects contributor. He is our Quebec Major Junior Hockey League expert, if you will. And he's also involved with Habs Eye on the Prize. And where else do you write, Hadi?
Well, that's mainly it. Dobber Prospects, Habs Eyes on the Prize. And I'm on YouTube making videos about the Habs' latest draft picks.
Right on. Well, welcome to the podcast, man. It's good to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing good. So that was like my fifth draft, but it was your first. What were some of your impressions of being at a live NHL draft? What'd you like?
I mean, wow. It was an amazing experience. I met up with a bunch of people. I didn't know the scouting sphere partied as hard as it did, but man, that was next level. John Lou's got some pipes on him. He went at it at karaoke. That was really fun. But draft-wise itself, man, I mean, sitting a couple feet away from Joe Sakic, watching the different teams and the tables and how they interact and how vocal, it is on the actual floor of the draft, and especially seeing every single GM on their phone almost the whole time was a different experience. I knew that like draft day is pretty much the busiest day of the year for GMs, but that was next level.
Yeah, it's a good time, and it's very interesting to be right there in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. So speaking of drafts, let's do a fantasy ranking for the draft. Now, this is a rankings that I've kind of come up with, and I've invited Hadi to come on and kind of critique and bounce some ideas off me on my rankings and tell me if I've got guys too high or too low, or if he agrees or disagrees. Mm-hmm. Now, before we get into all that, I should kind of go over what my criteria for this ranking would be. So I had a little bit of a process for ranking them for fantasy value. Now, obviously, I've got a profile on some of these players, some better than others. And you've got where they were actually drafted in the NHL, which is a really strong factor for me as well. You'll have a lot of people will just use that as their draft list. Wherever they went in the NHL is good enough for NHL GMs. It's good enough for my fantasy league. Mm-hmm. But there's a cautionary tale there where you can draft guys who are great NHL players, but lousy fantasy hockey players. And I'm looking at you, Logan Stanley.
Absolutely.
So
perfect example.
Yeah. So some of the factors that go into this, I'm focusing on, and I'm pretty confident in saying that a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are hardcore fantasy hockey dorks like Hadi and I, and they're not in these casual 12-team leagues. If they're looking at drafting guys like Rutger McGoarty, they're in a dynasty full league, like 20-plus teams with full rosters and a full prospect bench in a league that tries to simulate what being an NHL GM is like. So I've got some factors that go into this because it's fantasy hockey are, what's the player's ETA? Like, how long am I going to be waiting on this guy? Is he going to be in the NHL right away or in a year or two? Then that bumps him up the level a little bit. If he's like a long-term project, like 5 years, then that bumps him way down. What is their offensive ceiling and what is their offensive floor? Those are two really big factors. What team drafted them is another important factor, right? Like a player that gets drafted by Arizona versus a player that gets drafted by Detroit. There's weight in that. What position they play too. I find that a lot of the leagues that I'm in, the value in defensemen isn't as high as it is in offensive forwards. So I put a little bit more emphasis on the forward position. And then, of course, being in multi-cat leagues, players who offer you a variety of stats other than just straight up points get a boost as well. So all that being said, why don't we just tuck right into this there, Hadi?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm guessing we start with the Wright versus Slafkovsky debate.
Yeah, and this is one that I've really wrestled with which way I want to go with this, right? And there's a couple of factors here. So I like Shane Wright more than I like Slafkovsky. Slafkovsky goes first overall to Montreal. Who's going to be closer to NHL ready? Shane Wright has less competition to crack the Seattle roster. I think there's a sense of urgency for them to include star players on the roster in Seattle to help sell tickets and generate a fan base. Slafkovsky goes first overall, so there's that unwritten rule that he has to go into the NHL right away that was only debunked by Owen Power last year.
Yep.
Slafkovsky definitely has a more meaty game, right? He will get way more hits than Shane Wright will. I think Shane Wright will get more points than Slafkovsky will. And if you're in a league that counts face-off wins, I think the face-off wins edge goes to Shane Wright and the hits edge goes to Slafkovsky. I'm not sure that there's going to be a big enough difference in penalty minutes or if leagues even count penalty minutes. So with the hits and the face-off wins, for me, being a bit of a wash category-wise, I got to give the edge to Shane Wright because I think he's going to outproduce Jurai Slafkovsky more consistently and sooner. So it's a slight edge for Shane Wright to me over Slafkovsky. And I don't know, what's your take on that, Bell?
Yeah, well, it's a certainty with Wright, right? Like you're looking at a prospect who is almost a guaranteed top 6 player. The thing is, I did a 26-minute video on Slafkovsky on YouTube. So like I broke down the ins and outs of his game, and he has that, superstar top line potential. If he works, I mean, he's the best puck protector I've seen in a long time in the draft. But the main concern with him is his decision making, and that is something that usually takes a lot of time to turn from a relative weakness to a bona fide strength. So in terms of who's going to get the more points the soonest, I think Shane Wright outscores Slafkovsky by a decent margin this year, unless Slafkovsky somehow makes it on the top line with Suzuki and Caulfield. You got to keep in mind also that Montreal's kind of weak on the left side, right? So he's positionally he's in a beneficial sort of situation with the Habs, but I still think Wright has the edge. And I think, again, the fact that he's a center, the fact that Wright still kind of throws his body around, he's no Slafkovsky, but he's going to get his fair share of hits. He's going to win faceoffs. In multi-cat, there's no doubt about it. It's Right. But if I'm thinking really sort of points only for the few that are part of those types of leagues, those sort of keeper leagues, I wouldn't hesitate to take a swing at Slafkovsky if you really like the player and you're just a fan and you want him sort of part of your organization. I think he's a decent swing to take because he has sort of 90+ point potential if his decision making improves and if he starts playing under pressure, with more consistency. We saw him at the World Juniors. We saw him at the important tournaments, and he did well under pressure. But he excels with a lot of time on the puck, and you won't get as much of that in the NHL. But if he managed to iron that out of his game, he's fine.
Right. And another layer on this onion that could definitely move the needle in Slafkovsky's direction is I haven't ruled out the possibility that Shane Wright plays, 9 games or less in the NHL this season, and then the rest of the year in the OHL. He missed an entire year of development to COVID in the OHL, right? Like he didn't play at all that year other than the U18s. So I'm not counting on that, but there's like a 20, 30 maybe % chance that he goes back to the CHL.
Yeah, it's a non-zero chance, and you got to take that into consideration. But I think with the lack of depth in Seattle and the fact that he's a very well-rounded, very developed prospect already, I'd place my bets on him being in the NHL full-time.
I like his chances of playing full-time NHL this season more than Slafkovsky's.
Yeah, absolutely. I recommended in my video to put Slafkovsky in the AHL for a year. I think that would help him a lot in terms of his development.
Agreed. I mean, Neither team's really in a rush to throw these stars into their
Right?
roster in terms of like championship chasing.
No, exactly.
And you don't, if you're thinking about going after Connor Bedard, do you really want to expose a player to a losing season in the NHL?
Exactly.
All right, so that's 1-2. I think we're on the same page. That it's a fine margin, but with a slight edge to Shane Wright over Slafkovsky. And then I don't think it's a significant drop off when you go to number 3 on my list either. And this guy might have the highest fantasy ceiling in the entire draft class. And he went 3rd overall to Arizona, and he's 3rd overall on my list. So the reason why he's not really in contention with the top 2 for me is because he's going to the NCAA, and he's going to play at least one season there. So, you're drafting a guy that's going to have pretty much zero impact on your fantasy roster this year. The only way he does, if it's like for a cup of coffee in like March, April after the NCAA season.
Yeah, and I'd be surprised if Luke Hughes is going back to the NCAA for another year. I think Cooley's probably set for 2 years. I'd be surprised if he even gets a cup of coffee at the end of the year. I love the prospect. I love the creativity, the vision, the skating's pretty good. He does have a bit of sort of noise in his upper body when he skates, but doesn't really limit his game too much. The one thing that I think will sort of bump Cooley down is the Arizona factor, of course, where he's been drafted by a team that doesn't have a good track record of having his players really put up many points at any level, especially the pros. I mean, Phil Kessel had a terrible year in terms of production relative to what we're used to from him. And it's mainly, I don't know what the end result is, but I think it's just Arizona just has a bad track record with it, and you got to go with history there and sort of compare. So I definitely agree that Cooley's sort of under them in the categories. We'll get to him later, but I think Frank Nazar is in contention with Cooley in that 3rd slot. I truly believe in that player's potential, and they're sort of neck and neck for me in terms of their upside. So that's how I see it.
All right. Yeah, I like Nazar too. I got him a couple points down, so we'll get back to him in a sec. So Logan Cooley comes in at number 3. Then I have Buffalo's 9th overall pick, Mattt Savoie from Winnipeg in the WHL, ranked at my number 4. So he goes up to 4. That jumps him up about 5 positions. That's a nice little bump. I like him because I think his offensive ceiling is high, and his floor is also high too. I like the opportunity he has with Buffalo. They've got a lot of prospects, but not a lot of competition on the roster, and they got some players who should be aging out pretty soon, moving along, contracts expiring, whatnot. So he should be back for another year in junior. So again, a player who's not going to. Pretty much none of these players beyond the top 2 are really going to have an impact on your roster right away. So it goes from being from here on out, no chance this guy's having an impact on your roster this year, or
definitely not,
or very little chance. How long do you have to wait? So with Savoie, he's got 2 more years of junior eligibility, potentially a year or 2 of pro development in the American Hockey League. But I just, the way the Buffalo is building something and his upside, I kind of like him for a bit of a long-term project here at number 4.
Yeah, I don't know about Savoie. I'm not the biggest. I'm not really sold on this game as much as other people are. There are some limitations to his play. When he's pressured physically, his game deteriorates really quickly, and maybe that's learned with time. Maybe it's just the slight frame, but at 5'9", 180, he's pretty stocky, so I wouldn't really pin it on that. It's more mental when you watch him play. It's sort of, as soon as there's one guy, or especially when there's 2 guys on him, the puck leaves the stick as quickly as possible, and usually it's not in a good direction. So is he going to be able to translate that perfectly to the NHL and have sort of that top line floor? I'm not too sure. I'd see him more as, a bona fide second liner. The type of player who's going to score a good amount of goals because he gets to areas really well and gets free in the slot a bunch, and especially he's really good on the half wall in the power play. But I have my reservations about Savoie. I'd place him more around where he was drafted, sort of 9th, 10th, 11th overall, that kind of range. But as a center, he'll get a lot of value. I still see him as more of a winger at the NHL level. Due to the pace and quick reactions with which he plays, but it's sort of iffy for me with Savoie. He's hit or miss. I've had some viewings where I absolutely loved him, and other viewings where I'm like, what is going on? So it's hit or miss.
Well, that consistency factor is a common underlying theme with a lot of 18-year-olds. If he can round that out and be more on the impressive side than the underwhelming side, then he definitely moves up. So maybe I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt there that he'll figure that out. For sure. Buffalo also doesn't have a super tremendous track record of development like Arizona, so I might have him a little higher now that you're kind of talking me out of this, Hadi. I have him too high.
Perhaps.
All right. So number 5, I've got Philadelphia Flyers Cutter Gauthier. He went 5th overall. I have him 5th. I think it's a par ranking here. So I had an episode with Pete Krupski, and he talked about the U.S. Players in this draft. There's a lot of them, and I like them all quite a bit. He's comparing Cutter Gauthier to a Tkachuk. And in a roto league, those players' value increases significantly.
Yep.
He thinks that he can play center, so he might be a player who does have dual positional eligibility. Could get you some face-off wins from the wing. I think he's going to be a decent volume shooter, a decent volume hitter. I think he'll get some time on the power play, probably planted in front of the net. Yeah. I just don't think he's got a lot of competition in Philadelphia to crack the roster. Nope. He's going to, I think it's a Northeastern team, Boston, one of the Bostons, I believe he's going to. I'm not sure. But he strikes me as a one and done because he's just so physically mature, and his game looked pretty close to NHL ready. He was impact player at the U18s. So I think the turnaround time on him making it to your fantasy roster is going to be short. I think his offensive ceiling isn't that high, but his floor is. And then he'll level out the playing field with his peripheral stats and value across the board.
100%. To me, Cutter Gauthier has middle six forward written all over him. It's so clear that, if he doesn't, that's his floor to me. I don't think he's going to be that proper top line player. But just a middle six guy who's going to pot 25 plus on a regular basis and be reliable defensively. If he plays center, he's going to be taking a bunch of face-offs. He transitions extremely well. I mean, he's got a lot of speed. I think he'll excel more at the wing because I think his pace is better than his vision, with and without the puck. But he could play center, and he could do a good job of it. But I think really, if you put him at left wing, he's got top 6 potential. He can complement smarter players really well. I think if somehow Gauthier and Bobby Brink end up on the same line, it's over for us. Like Philadelphia is just going to run the parade with those two. They complement each other really well. Their skill sets are very complementary. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him sort of have a very decent impact. And I understand him being that high. The player right after him, I'm still going to be banging that drum. Probably the better of the NTDP players in terms of upside, especially in points only, but Gauthier is really worth taking a look at, a very, very good look at in Roto and Multicat.
All right, so that tease you're talking about is Frank Nazar. We talked about him briefly. I have him ranked at 6th. He was picked 13th overall, so I bumped him up quite a bit, 7 places. You like to move the needle a little bit further, all the way up into the 4 range. So a couple picks higher than where I have him. He's a Blackhawks selection. Now I don't really have a problem with that. The Hawks they've been kind of hit or miss with some of their prospect development, and that's pretty average. Obviously he's going to be a big part of their future as they're going scorched earth here, and they'll be looking to make more roster spots for these prospects in the next couple of years. He's headed to the NCAA as well, so a good candidate for a one and done, 2 years, I think, at the most, and he'll be vying for a full-time top 6 NHL position. He's going to University of Michigan, so they got a super duper program there that's graduating tons of stars. They'll have a new coach, but still, you gotta like the team that he'll be playing on.
Yep.
So here's your soapbox. Step on up and sell me on Frank Nazar. Why I've got him too low at 6.
To put it very simply, he's got the highest points only upside in the draft. I think that includes Wright and Slafkovsky. I think if he hits, he's going to hit massively. We're talking 90 plus points, sort of Mitch Marner sort of range of points. He's a similar type of player where his skating carries a lot of his offense, but he's a better scorer and maybe a less impressive playmaker than Marner. I'd equate him a bit to Braden Point, especially in terms of his ability to drive results in transition. He used to, at the start of the year when I watched him, I had him much lower. I had him in the 20s because what I saw is a player who got inside at all costs. So no matter what was the right thing to do, he would cut across defenders' hands and try to get scoring chances from the slot, right? But as the year went on, I saw more give and go. I saw more using the boards, circling back, delaying, finding other pass options. He just added layers and layers and layers to his game. And the thing that really impressed me the most is during the middle of the year, January, February, the amount of times that he would be surrounded by 4 opponents and have the puck on the tip of his stick. And I'd look down on my data sheet to jot him down for a turnover, and I'd look up and he'd still have the puck. I can't count. It was easily like 5-6 times a game. So I was just like, yeah, no, this is a player who can control the chaos, who is the controlled chaos, and who does a great job of retaining pucks through pressure and doing the right things at the right moments. And to me, the hockey sense is through the roof, the skating's through the roof. He's got a great shot. He's got great playmaking. I just don't see what's really missing with him. And I think he's got a high floor. For me, he's probably at worst a third line play driving center. And he can play the wing. So he's got that positional, that multi-positional eligibility. So, I mean, the value's all there.
Well, I also like him. I guess not enough, though. Yeah. That's pretty glowing report. All right. So that's our top 6. At number 7, I have Nashville Predators Joakim Kemell. He ended up going 17th in the draft. So I bump him up 10 into the 7th position. Goal scoring winger. Going to take some time to get through the Nashville system. He'll probably stay in Europe. I think he's in Finland with JYP. Probably going to be there for 2 years, and then maybe looking at a cup of coffee in the NHL, but most likely some time with I think Milwaukee's their AHL affiliate now. So a wait time, but his goal scoring ability he's one of the best shooters in the draft class. So you can't have him outside the top 10 when he's one of the best goal scorers in the draft, right? So that's kind of where I have him ranked in here. What's your take on him?
Well, Kemell for me is in the top 3 in terms of scores. I think he's 3rd behind Furcus first and Lekkerimaki second. So his goal scoring's up there already in terms of the potential for goals. I think he could very, very well score 30 plus on a regular basis. He's also got very, very soft hands. He's extremely physical for a player of his size and his sort of skill set. Engages along the boards a lot. I don't see the high-end vision or the high-end sort of creativity and deception and manipulation that I like to see in forwards that I consider sort of top 10 locks, but the scoring is definitely there, the hands are definitely there, and he's going to get you some hits. So yeah, he's impressively well-rounded for the type of player that he is and strives to be. But there are some definite key lackings that would sort of probably bump him down a couple notches for me. But again, it depends on the factors, really. He's definitely in the range that I'd consider him, though.
All right, I had Jonathan Lekkerimaki, another right winger who went to Vancouver. He's the 15th overall pick. So I kind of oscillated between these two. I like one more than the other. I like the other more than the one. Back and forth. It's pretty much a coin toss for me. Do you see these guys that close too, or there's a bigger divide for you?
No, definitely they're pretty close. The difference is I'd say Kemell has a B game and Lekkerimaki doesn't. But the difference is Lekkerimaki is an elite goal scorer, and Kemell is a very, very good goal scorer. So it just depends on what you prefer. Do you prefer upside or certainty? To me, Lekkerimaki represents a higher upside. He's got 40 goal potential, but Kemell represents a sure bet because he's got many, many different facets of his game that could hit. Whereas Lekkerimaki, if he's not scoring, the rest of his game isn't really up to par. So for me, he's a bit sort of right behind him because I do believe in certainty. But man, if he's developed properly and he hits, he's going to be a tremendous goal scorer at the next level.
Well, we're talking top 10 pick here. So if I'm picking in the top 10 and I got this choice, I'll take the guy that has the higher certainty. I mean, I just want to hit with my first round pick. If it's an 8 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10, that's still good. If it's an 8 out of 10 is better than a 0, then that's a huge win. Yeah. All right, so you've probably noticed that I haven't ranked a defenseman yet. I said off the top that I gave them a little bit less value. So my top 8 are Wright, Slafkovsky, Cooley, Savoie, Gauthier, Nazar, Kemell, Lekkerimaki. Now I got 2 defense, and probably not too surprising to most people, Simon Nemec is my top-ranked D right shot defenseman. He went 2nd overall, but he drops 7 positions in a fantasy draft. New Jersey Devils player. I like his opportunity to be a top 4 pairing defenseman for them in the not too distant future. You know, they don't have 2 stud defensemen like Buffalo does or Anaheim does. They would make a roadblock competition for him. And I think he checks a couple of boxes too, right? He's not only just offensive, but he can do some hits and some blocks as well. So would he be your top fantasy ranked defenseman?
I'm not too sure. Now, there's one thing that I would definitely sort of take into consideration. He had 17 points in 19 playoff games for HK Nitra.
That's not bad.
That's not bad. That's probably that's better than most draft eligible forwards. We're talking about a pro league. I mean, it's not the highest quality pro league, but he's still playing against men and putting up results that I think it was just 2nd on his team in points and on his whole team. Like this includes 30-year-olds. So that's definitely promising. And you look at the projections, you look at NHL equivalency, and no one's even close to him. But for me, watching them both on the ice and what they do, David Jiricek to me has higher offensive upside. He's probably going to be putting up more points. Nemec to me is a bona fide guaranteed top 4 defenseman. He's got all his stops, skates like the wind, carries the puck extremely well. He's going to be your bona fide top 4 puck moving defenseman. Is he going to be able to outrank Dougie Hamilton? I'm not sure. That's the main thing that sort of sticks to me, especially with the Devils. Whereas Jiricek, the sky's the limit. Offensively, I mean, the shot's ridiculous. The passing's ridiculous. He's extremely aggressive, both offensively and defensively. He'll get you hits. He'll contribute everywhere. Whereas Nemec is very, very good at the maybe 3 things he does. So that's the difference between them. I'd say Jiricek is less of a sure bet, but definitely higher upside. Whereas if you really sort of want certainty, then I'd go for Nemec first.
Interesting, because I don't even have Jiricek as my number 2 defenseman. I have him a little bit further down outside my top 10 at 13. So right behind Nemec, and I almost put him ahead of Nemec, I have Denton Mateychuk, Columbus Blue Jackets. So there's 2 super defensemen coming up for Columbus, Mateychuk and Jiricek.
That pairing would be so ridiculous. I don't mean so good. It would be insanity to watch.
Yeah. Well, Mateychuk really impressed me in the viewings that I had. I think he plays like a rover sometimes. He's very, very active offensively. So I'm not sure he's going to really rack up the peripheral stats. And I tend to kind of try to build my fantasy teams in the Roto multi-cat leagues where I look for the bulk of my hits and all of my blocks from my defense and the bulk of my points from my forwards. So, Mateychuk would kind of be bucking the trend for me there, but I just think his offensive upside is so high that I have him as my 10th ranked player in this draft. And with Jiricek 13 and a couple of forwards in between there at 11 and 12, I've got Connor Geekie and Marco Kasper. So Connor Geekie was 11th. I have him ranked 11th. He's Arizona prospect. The Arizona factor kind of knocks him down a tiny bit. Like Savoie, he's got probably 2 more years of junior coming to him. But I like that he's also got the size and the ability to give you some greasy stats. Yeah. My concern is, does he make it? He's got to work on his skating.
It's a major issue.
Right.
And he's not the most physical for a guy's size. I don't see him sort of throw his body around with as much aggression as Slafkovsky, for example, even though they're about the same size and weight. So it's just he's a tough projection, especially on Arizona. That's the one guy that I think I'd bump down the most if it was up to me. But I mean, he still has that value, and if he hits hard. Like this is a player with incredible vision and incredible understanding of his surroundings. There's just too many questions for me to take him this high.
Now, Marco Kasper is a player that really rose up the draft rankings, especially in the second half of the season, played his way all the way up to 8th overall. So I knocked him down 4 positions, and Detroit has a bit of a history lately of moving up on the consensus rankings and draft players. And in hindsight, it always looks good for them. So I'm kind of nervous about ranking him lower than where
that's the
Detroit
thing.
picked him.
You got to trust the Yzer plan for sure.
Right. So Marco Kasper going to Detroit. He's a forward. They've got a decent prospect pool, but there's room for him to break in there. Marco Kasper at 12, too high, too low?
Right about where I'd take him.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people see him as, he's a sure bet, low floor, high ceiling, low ceiling, high floor type of player. But I mean, man, he's got layers to his game, especially at the World Juniors. When at the World Championship, when I saw him play, it was like, man, who is this? Like, completely different player that I saw in the SHL. So, really took a step up.
Yeah. All right. So the next player I have here, Jiricek, we talked about him. I've got 14th now, is one of my biggest risers, is Isaac Howard. 31st player picked in the first round, so late first round pick. I've got him halfway up in the middle at 14. That's plus 17 positions. Drafted by the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he looked good walking out on stage, didn't he? With that neck and the American flag belt.
He's ballsy.
Kid's got swagger. I like that. Yeah. I like the swagger. And I think he's one of the more underrated players in the draft here. He was kind of a little bit buried on a deep USNTDB team, and I just don't think that he got as much of the limelight as he should have had. And I like his offensive ceiling. I think if everything breaks right for him, he could be a pretty strong, impactful fantasy player, and in short order too, right? He'll be going to the NCAA as well. So, you're looking at potentially 2 years. Yeah.
I wasn't really sold on Howard when I watched him. I mean, I had him in or very near the end of my first round. The thing with me that strikes me the most in terms of what's lacking in Howard's game is that layered understanding of the game. I don't see him delay a lot. He loves to push the pace and get around defenders and sort of push as hard as he can, but I don't see him sort of cut back, find other passing lanes, all that really sort of layered thinking type stuff that I love to see. I'm a big smarts guy, so maybe it's just sort of personal bias, but his style of play didn't strike me as extremely intelligent. It just struck me as very skillful, very, very sort of pacey. But for me, you need a baseline in terms of hockey sense in order to make it in the NHL, even as a fourth liner. So that's where I have my doubts, especially since hockey sense is like the toughest thing to learn as a prospect. Usually it's either you have it or you don't, or it takes you a long while to figure it out. So I don't know. I still understand taking him here because of the upside, but there's a lot of hurdles he'll need to go through to get there.
All right. And then 15th, I've got Noah Ostlund. He's 16th overall, so right around where his NHL draft was. Buffalo Sabres forward. So Buffalo's got a couple players in this ranking. They really shored up their prospect pool this year.
They did. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's gonna be wait time on him. He's gonna be in Europe for a little bit, I believe, and worth the wait.
Oh yeah. I was just talking about layered thinking and advanced processing and understanding of the game. That exemplifies Noah Ostlund to me. I mean, this is a player who, although his shot needs a lot of work, but other than that, he's probably one of the more intelligent players in this draft. He hangs on to pucks. He can stick handle in a phone booth. He knows when and where to pass in order to open up lanes and open up shooting opportunities. He plays big brain hockey, which is what I love to see.
All right, so moving along in our draft rankings here, I've got the 16th ranked, and I'm going back on the blue line here, and this is another Anaheim prospect. Man, their blue line is going to be scary good. I've got Pavel Mintyukov. He goes down 6 positions. He was the 10th overall pick in the NHL draft. So he falls down a couple positions for me, Hadi, because of his position and the roster blockers he's got with Zellweger and Drysdale in front of him in the Duck system whenever he does make it. That's a problem for me. Now, we're talking 2 years away, so there could be a trade between now and then with any one of these 3 guys, which changes that dynamic entirely, but it is what it is for now. So that's why I have him at 16th. He could be ranked higher. I'd probably have him ahead of Howard and Ostlund and Kasper maybe and Geekie, but because of the situation, this is where he is.
Yeah, and that's definitely understandable. The situation around him sort of bumps him down, definitely. But in terms of the raw prospect himself, to me, Mintyukov he's just tall Denton Mateychuk. They're pretty much the same prospect. Mintyukov and Mateychuk, I've seen them both chase their own dump-ins in the corner and come out with a puck as defensemen. Yeah. So they're the exact same sort of mold of just the title of defenseman is just it's like a suggestion to them more than an actual sort of fixed position. Mintyukov also has that high-end creativity, that ability to open up seams and thread passes through them really well. He's got a wicked shot from the point. He's got a lot of decent offensive tools. So I put him in that same category as Mateychuk. I don't know if he'll be as effective in terms of his style, because mostly short defensemen tend to excel in those roles. You think of Quinn Hughes, you think of defensemen like that, and it's mostly sort of that short rover, that shifty short rover that excels. But he's got more ranginess to his game, and if it weren't for the fact that Anaheim's defense core is so stacked in terms of prospects, he'd definitely be higher for me.
Okay, so 17th, I've got a player who I kind of had higher going into the end of the draft season, and he ended up going a little bit lower in the draft than I thought he would, and they ended up going to Winnipeg. So those were a couple of strikes against him that kind of knocked him down a few pegs on my rankings, and I even moved him down 3 positions from where he was drafted in the NHL draft. So that's Rutger McGoarty, another national team player. I had him a lot closer earlier in the season to Cutter Gauthier. I had them very similar neighborhood. And now I'm looking at my list here and I'm like, remind me again why I've got him so low now. And I'm not really sure. So I think this could be a player I have underrated, and he's probably in a similar range in a lot of other people's draft lists, and could be sneaky good value, I think, actually.
Yeah, and the thing is with McGoarty is I had him in the early second round, and my reasoning for that is that he's a tremendous goal scorer. He can put the puck in the net really easily and offers good offensive upside. I just don't see that high-end decision-making, and I don't see that high-end skating that I like to see from prospects. And those are my 2 favorite things. Is if you're a good skater and you've got a good head on you, you're going to excel at the NHL level most of the time. So that's why he was lower than that for me. I had him 36th overall in my personal rankings, the ones that I put out on Twitter. Yeah, there were some major concerns that I saw in his game, but his skating did come a certain way. I don't see him as the type of player who's going to put up a lot of assists. He's mostly at the end of plays, finishing them off and finding space off the puck to get shots off. That's mainly where he excels. But once he's got the puck, he'll sometimes go for shots when there's very, very obvious passing lanes there and stuff like that. So I do have my reservations about McGoarty, but I've talked to other scouts who had him in their top 10. So it's just a matter of preference, really. It's just a style of player that I favor. Doesn't really match the mold of player that McGoarty is, but it's really a matter of opinion at that point.
All right. Now, 18th, I'm kind of going on a bit of a gamble here with Ivan Miroshnichenko. So kind of maybe reaching for him. He's the 20th pick in the NHL NHL Draft. I have him ranked 18th, so I've moved him up 2. I like the fact that he's picked by Washington. You know, I think he's got some mentorship capabilities there with Kuznetsov and Ovechkin. Could potentially be coming to North America to play in the CHL, as he was an import draft selection. The real wild cards with him, of course, are the Russian factor and his health. Now, the latest kind of buzz around the campfire is that he's responding well to the treatments, and you know, he should be back on the ice come training camp, I think. Plan, hopefully. So, you know, lost the better part of a season of development. Had a brush with death, a life-threatening illness, but you know, he's overcome it and he's back on track. So the Russian factor is more of a factor, I think, than the health one. And I like the fact that he's with Washington. So, you know, could be another bit of a risk with this player, but a good payoff.
Yeah, well, Miroshnichenko, in short, he's a freak athlete, probably one of the best athletes, like pure athletes in the draft in terms of stamina, strength, endurance, all that good stuff. But the decision-making is wildly inconsistent. There have been games I've watched where his decision-making with the puck has been beer league, and I'm not even kidding. So it's just, what are you getting with this prospect? There's so much uncertainty around him. But the athleticism that he does show does give some sort of promise. And the brand of cancer that he got, I think, was Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is I think the same that Phil Kessel had at one point, and the same that a couple other prospects have gone through. So I'm not too worried about Miroshnichenko's health. It's just what's going on between the ears when he's on the ice that kind of bumped him down my rankings. He was in my second round as well, my early second round.
All right. Another player I have moving up 9 positions, he was picked 28th by Buffalo, is Jiri Kulich. He's got the potential to be a pretty good goal scorer, and he could be competing with the likes of Jack Quinn for a top 6 role with the Sabres down the road. I like his goal scoring ability. And what term? It was the U18s where he really lit it up, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
The U18s are the World Championship, something like that.
U18 Worlds, yeah.
Yeah, where he had a whole bunch of goals.
7 goals in 7 games.
That's
or 9
good.
goals in 6 games or something like that.
Yeah, last time I looked, that was good. And then he looked good at the World Juniors, too, that just passed as well. I kind of kept my eye on him a little bit there, and he did not look bad. So I think he's got some good fantasy value. Not a lot of bangers or rotisserie stats. Like, he's a winger, so you're not going to get any face-offs from him. And I don't think you're going to get any hits or blocks or penalty minutes from him. So he's a purely offensive player, which keeps him, out of the top 15 for me.
Well, actually, the thing with Kulich is he's probably in the top 3 or top 5 best defensive forwards in the draft. He's genuinely amazing defensively. Like, that's the main thing that the main takeaway I had from him. He's not going to put up many hits he actually he played center a lot of the year in Czechia. So that's also something that's playing in his favor. So you've got a player with multi-positional value who's really, really, really good defensively, has great compete, and has a tremendous shot. For me, that's a player you look at in this range, absolutely, if you're a fantasy owner, definitely.
Yeah, defensive prowess doesn't necessarily directly translate to fantasy hockey, but what it does do is gains the confidence and trust of the coach, which in turn turns into a lot of time on ice, which
on the PK as well,
which does give you the ability to generate some offensive or fantasy relevant stats, right? If he's playing in a defensive position on a bad team and he doesn't have the puck a lot, guess what? He's going to be hitting.
Yep. Or blocking shots on the PK. I wouldn't be
Right.
surprised to see him in that role.
All right. So 2 more forwards coming in at 20 and 21. I've got Danila Yurov and Liam Ohgren, both Minnesota Wild prospects. So let's talk about those two guys. Do you like where these guys are ranked here in the early 20s?
I do, and I think I'd flip them personally. I think Ohgren has a tiny bit more offensive upside and a tiny bit more projectability than Yurov. Yurov is also this kind of player with a lot of uncertainty about him, but he has a lot of speed and handles the puck really well at high speeds. He rarely loses the puck when he's skating at his top speed. So for me, Ohgren simply has a more well-rounded game, a more NHL certain game, and an NHL projectable game, in my opinion.
All right. So then the next player I have coming in at 22 is a player that got a lot of buzz and a lot of people like, and I think he'll be higher on some people's draft list just because they want to have him. And that's Jagr Firkus going to Seattle. Now, the reason why I have him no higher than 22, which is 13 positions higher than his NHL draft slotting, so I bumped him up significantly, is his size and the incubation period. He's not going to be very large. He's already, got an NHL-ready shot. That goal he scored at the top prospects game was an NHL goal. Like, the kid can shoot.
Oh, yeah.
He can kind of dangle the puck a little bit. He's very agile. He's very shifty, elusive. He's quick. He's an aggressive forechecker. I like all those things, and I think it's going to get him to the NHL. I just think it's going to take some time. And if he's not scoring, he's not fantasy relevant.
Yeah, to an extent, I'd agree. The thing is, I look at him versus Savoie, and I'm going to sound crazy for this, but there's a debate there. I mean, they're both similar in terms of their size. They've both got sort of similar styles, but I see Firkus, and I just see more projectability. And they might take more time than Savoie to crack the NHL, but man, both of them at their best, I'd say Firkus would probably be a more fantasy relevant player than Savoie. He's that good. So yeah, I'm very sold on Jagr Firkus.
So he went in the second round. I have him 22nd. That's plus 13. Where would you ballpark rank him?
Top 10. I'd put him above. I'd put him above Kemell and Lekkerimaki probably.
Wow.
I'm that high on him. Yeah, I love this prospect.
He is fun to watch, right? And that's part of being in fantasy hockey, right? Is you got a player on your fantasy roster that you really like, and you're at the bar and you're looking at the Sportsnet and you see him score a highlight reel goal. You buy everyone a round of drinks because that's fun to watch.
Absolutely.
Okay, my biggest faller, minus 16 spots, is a defenseman, and that's Kevin Korchinski, Chicago Blackhawks. I'm probably going to get a little bit of flack on this one, but I'm just not quite as sold on Korchinski being a top. I think he's an NHL player, but
Definitely.
I'm just not sure he's a top 4 guy. And I just think he's going to be a big minute defenseman, but I don't think he's ever going to score, 10 goals. And I'm not really sure how fantasy relevant he's going to be because he doesn't play he won't get you the greasy stats like even Logan Stanley will get. So where's the value here?
Well, first, I wholeheartedly agree with you on this. To me, Korchinski is a type of player who has a formula and sticks to it. So what he loves to do is he cuts to the inside. He'll pivot and cut to the inside and then try to find a pass through the middle of the ice. And he does that brilliantly. But I don't think he has as many areas to his game as Mateychuk or Mintyukov or Jiricek or Nemec. He's very formulaic. And some players find their formula and it works in the NHL and they just do that and do that and do that. You look at Phil Kessel, Alex Ovechkin. They have a formula and it works, but they also have other facets which make them elite players. You know what I mean? So if he finds other areas to his game, you've got a great prospect. But as he stands right now, the type of hockey that he plays, it's very straightforward. It's very predictable. And especially in the playoffs when teams are watching footage and clips of you regularly, that's going to be broken down really easily, I feel.
Yeah. Well, But glad you agree with me. You're a very smart guy.
Thank you.
24th, I've got the 23rd picked player. Again, another player who I think his fantasy value is right on par with his NHL value, and that's Jimmy Snuggerud going to the St. Louis Blues. I think Snuggy's a good player. He's got some offensive upside. His ceiling isn't very high, but his floor is, and he'll get you plenty of greasy stats. He's a pesky player. Very aggressive forechecking, gets under the skin of the other team. He's the player that you're gonna love him when he's on your team, and you're gonna hate him when you're watching him and he's on another team.
100%.
Yeah. So, and I think he'll fit in real well with St. Louis. I think he plays their style of game. So
absolutely.
I like his future. Another NTDB player who's going to NCAA. Probably looking at 2 years of development in college for him, because I think he'll try and get his offensive upside to the point where he's a point a game area player in the NCAA. If he gets to that level, then I think he'll be ready to turn pro. But as a freshman, he probably won't get enough opportunity, so it might take him 2, maybe 3 years. That's my take on Snuggerud.
That's bang on, yeah.
All right, well, let's move on. Philip Messar, 25th. He was, again, ranked, drafted 26th in the NHL draft. Montreal got him, so I'm sure you have a detailed file working for a Habs Eye on the prize. So what's your take on another Montreal player on this list?
Well,
I got 2 more after this, by the way.
Oh, yeah, we're good to go. But, all of the Habs prospects, and up until Cédric Guindon in the 4th round, I've put out a video on them. So I've scouted them in depth. I've tracked their data, all that stuff. Meshar strikes me as, first, a tremendous skater, and second, an incredibly intelligent player. I mean, off the puck, the routes that he takes, the changes of directions, the fact that he's able to slow down to hit pockets of space at the right times. I mean, there's so many layers to his game that I think he's almost a guaranteed NHL player. And on top of it, he's got a very decent shot, and he can connect plays really well with his playmaking. So there are so many different layers to his game that one is bound to translate well. But his eye for the game alone, his intelligence alone, should make him a very worthwhile pick in this range. I think this is about where I'd take him, though.
All right, and I think the incubation period on him is going to be a patience thing here. He's in Europe. He's going to be there for a couple of years, and then he'll looking at probably a season of American Hockey League before he's in consideration for your NHL roster and fantasy.
Absolutely.
All right. We got a chance to catch up with Jokki Nevalainen at the draft, who is now scouting for the Carolina Hurricanes, a former Dobber Prospects writer and scout. He and Carolina went ahead and picked Gleb Trikazov with, I believe it was their first pick, which wasn't until 60th overall. So he and another player coming up very soon are tied for plus 34 positional rankings in my fantasy draft. So I've got Gleb pretty high, and 2 reasons, basically. One, because I think his offensive upside is very good. And Carolina drafted him, and I just have a lot of faith in Carolina's scouting and developing abilities. So that was a plus for him. Trikazov moves up 34 points. Is he a first round worthy fantasy prospect here? It's a big leap.
It's funny you say that, because I had him 10th overall in my personal rankings. So very, very high on him. I absolutely love. To me, he's the most intelligent prospect in this draft, not named Shane Wright. And man, you watch him play, and the advanced reading of the game, the way that he thinks 3 or 4 steps ahead, is tremendous. He's got great playmaking. He's probably got one of the best shots. He's up there. I'd say he's top 5 or top 6, 7 in terms of shots in this year's draft. And he's got tremendous playmaking, and he's good defensively. I mean, there's so many different areas that I can name you about his game that I love. How do you not value this type of player? It's astounding to me. I think the only reason he slipped that far is that he's Russian. I can't name you another reason. He's just so complete of a player, on top of being intelligent. Those are the players that I love and that I would aim for in the higher ends of a draft.
Yeah, well, I think you've got an opportunity here. I think if you think he's a top 10 fantasy ranked player, I've moved him up about 2 rounds into the first round. So if people are sleeping on him, he's a player. If if you're in a deep league and you've got even a 15th kind of pick, that might be someone if you've got ranked in your top 10, you could probably get him pretty close between where I have him and ranked 15th.
Yeah, no, the rankings that I put out. Yeah, the rankings that I put out aren't really fantasy related. They're just my personal sort of preference of which player I would pick at that selection, right? But if we're talking strategically in terms of fantasy rankings, between 15 and 20 makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah, well, I know there's some smart people out there who are looking at him. I was having a chat with Daniel Negreanu on Twitter, and I think he might be. I probably shouldn't say that. I'm giving away his pick list because his draft's not coming up yet. But that's the player he's looking at.
Hell yeah!
All right, so I really struggled with this next guy, 27th. He ended up being picked 30th. I think he's maybe a boom or a bust. I'm just not really necessarily seeing the boom. I think I probably would put him on my do not draft list, to be quite honest with you. That's Brad Lambert. Going into the season, he was one of the higher ranked prospects. He just kind of struggled. He made the World Junior team in the August tournament and then ended up getting scratched as the tournament went on. He's got superb skating and he's got really good skill. But you've mentioned you're concerned about decision making with some players, and that is my red flag with this guy. I just really question his decision making and his hockey sense and his smarts, and that's only become more compound and more of a problem at the higher levels that he plays, right? Because it doesn't matter how fast you skate or how skilled you are, if you can't think the game at the level and pace that the NHL is played at, then it doesn't matter. You're not in it. So that's my concerns with Lambert. Now, I haven't personally watched him enough to cast that, judgment on him and say, do not draft. He's never going to make it. But I know some people have, but then I know some other people who are like, no, he's good. He'll make it. So
yeah,
bit of an enigma.
Do you want to guess who I have right after Gleb Cherkasov in my rankings at 11th overall? Is
it Brad Lambert?
Yeah, it is.
And all right. So we disagree on this one.
Yeah, and very simply, I did see at first when I'd watched maybe 3 or 4 games of his, I did see the concerns with decision making, especially watching him in Finland in the Liga. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, well, he's being put on the wing in a dump and chase system as an elite puck carrier. How in the hell is he supposed to be making good decisions? You know what I mean? And that was my reasoning for starting to sort of hone in on where he's getting his puck touches and what he's trying to do and what he's being forced to do by the system. And to me, it was just, he was placed on the wing in the dump and chase system, which meant he was there to receive the D's pass and tip it into the zone. So he would get literally 0.1 second of puck touch a shift. And then he'd be chasing the play in the offensive zone on the forecheck. And admittedly, he's not the best forechecker. But you place Brad Lambert in a possession system at center and have him carry the puck up the ice, which is the thing he's the best at doing. I don't think the decision making issue would be as big. I think it'd be halved in terms of its actual impact on his game. So it's just he was placed in a bunch of weird situations this year. He asked for a trade. To me, the main issue isn't really the decision making with Lambert. It's the lack of loyalty. Right. And that's one thing that teams look at. He might get traded a couple times. He might, struggle to get his coach's trust and stuff like that. And that might hold him back, which is why I completely understand having him in this range. But I mean, in terms of just looking at the player individually in a vacuum, he's just so skilled and so fast. And when he does get the chance, he does make good decisions. It's just he's not getting the chance right now,
Right. For me, I'm not sure the reward justifies the risk.
Absolutely.
I think there's other players that you can pick in whatever. Someone will pick them in the top 30, right? So there's other players who I'll pick all day, every day ahead of him that I think we talked about the certainty factor. I kind of like that. So I'll pass on Brad Lambert and I'll let someone else go ahead and not pick one of the other players that I like by selecting him.
Understandable.
All right, so two more players who I have huge gains who are both picked 62nd and 61st would be Lane Hutson and David Goyette. Now, not to totally contradict what I just said about Lambert, because Lane Hutton certainly has some risk and there's certainly some uncertainty because he is a very undersized player.
Oh, he's tiny.
Yeah, and his skating is not his greatest asset. So that's how does he overcome his size? Well, I had a couple interviews at the draft that are on previous episodes. I talked to Julie Robbenheimer about him. I talked to, I think it's Cam had a conversation with him about him, and also Russ Cohen. And, they all had pretty positive things to say about him. And Pete Krupski before the draft was super high on him as well. I think he's one of the more underrated because he went 62nd to Montreal, and I was thinking that he'd be a first round pick, and he almost wasn't a second round pick. He almost fell to the third round, right?
Yep. And here's another player I've made an extensive video on. But man, I mean, I've never seen a defenseman dictate play as efficiently as Lane Hutson does. He is he's so brainy. Like he just sees the game at a level that there's a pro scout on the Habs team where they put out a behind the scenes video for the draft and their selections and all that, and he was saying something I completely agree with, which is the percentage of pro NHL players who do what this kid does is extremely small. I mean, and those types of players, every contender has that kind of player.
Yeah, you can count those players with your fingers.
Exactly, and contenders aim for those players and get them. And I'm sure he was referring to the Cale Makar style. Now, I'm not saying Lane Hutson's on Cale Makar's level. No one is. He's the defensive McDavid. Yeah. But, I mean, you just watch him play and you see the intelligence, you see the understanding of the game, the vision, the passing execution. I mean, there's so many layers to his game. If his skating, all he needs to do is just improve his skating to a level where he can match his opponent's footwork off the rush. Once he does that, he's good. He's Quinn Hughes to me.
Yeah. So we talked about Trikazov and how he's a 60th picked player, probably someone who, might be a top 15 fantasy value. You can get past that, but I wouldn't wait until the 60th round. If you're looking at the NHL draft results and using that as your pick list, you will never get these players. You have to draft them ahead of where the NHL teams picked them. You have to pick these guys in the top 30. I don't think there's any way either of these players fall out of the top 30. And
absolutely not.
In any fantasy draft that's picking these kind of players in a league that has GMs that know what they're doing.
If he's there by 25, you jump on him. Jump on him. Like he's going to take some time, admittedly. He might take 3 to 4 years in the NCAA before he sees a minute of NHL ice time, but I mean, the upside with this player is sky high. I could see him put up 60 points. Like, he's that good.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so another player who went right in the same range as Trikazov and Goyette is it's right between them, actually. 61st, David Goyette between Trikazov and Hudson, I should say. A Seattle draft pick. Now, this is a player I think you might be able to get outside of the top 20, 30 in your fantasy draft. But I do like his offensive upside. I saw him a couple of times live playing in the OHL. Some shifts, some periods, some games, he was a non-factor. And then some shifts, some games, he was a 4-point-a-night player.
Yep.
Kid's got skills. He can handle the puck. Yeah. He's got really good vision. He reads the ice extremely well. He makes really good, smart passes that I didn't even really see as an option. As like, what's he doing? Oh, well, that worked out. Kind of reaction.
100%.
Things that you see when you're watching players like Mitch Marner play, right? Now, I don't think he's got Mitch Marner type upside, but he's got some vision similarities there.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that I didn't catch him as much as other prospects, so I mostly saw the games where he was a non-factor, but the few games that I watched that I was impressed with made me rank him in the top 45 of my personal rankings. He was 44th, but I still think I was very low on him compared to others. And I probably should have ranked him higher, at least at the top end of the second round. But man, I mean, this is a tremendously fast prospect with, when he's on, he is on. And like, you can't go wrong. Like, I'm usually an optimist when it comes to those guys. Like, I like to see a prospect at his best because at 18, you're not going to show much consistency. You don't have the pro habits of preparation and, sleeping early the night before and all the stuff that sort of develops consistency over time. So, like, you can develop those habits later on in your career. Maybe you're just not mature enough as you stand. But man, I mean, Goyette at 61st was just an easy swing. I mean, any NHL team should have been making that pick. I don't blame Carolina for taking Turkazov because again, I had him 10th overall. But Goyette, to me, if he's there between 20 and 40, you take him. He's an option, definitely.
Yeah, he's drafted by Seattle, so at the moment, there's not a lot of competition. They've had 2 drafts to build up a prospect pool.
Yeah.
But he's not NHL ready. He's got 2 more years of junior and then a year or 2 of AHL development. So that's 4 more drafts that Seattle will have under their belt by the time he's ready to compete. So, it'll be a totally different dynamic by the time he's NHL ready. So we'll see, but I think he's definitely got the offensive upside that makes him worthwhile. 30th ranked. I dropped him down 8 positions. He was picked 22nd overall by Anaheim. That's Nathan Gauthier. Made the Canadian World Junior team in a depth role. Coming out of the queue, kind of right between is there. I believe he played for Gatineau.
Yep. Quebec, the Ramparts.
Oh, yeah, even closer to you then. So he's got size. So I think he's another one of those limited offensive upside. Not a low ceiling, but limited with a good floor multi-cat option. So a nice safe pick in this range.
Yeah, and I actually interviewed him at the media availability the day before day 1 of the draft, and I was really impressed with his answers, and I think that's why he was drafted so high. I mean, he's very mature. Someone asked him about, what do you say to people who say that you're a third-line center at best? And he said, if I'm a third-line center in the NHL, that's a win for me. But my job is to prove that I can be better than that. But I would be more than content with playing in a third-line role at the NHL level. So very understanding of his position within the hockey sphere. I think he's very advanced in terms of his maturity, but also when you look at his game in a vacuum without all those off-ice factors, you see a player with good small ice play, a player with advanced understanding of his surroundings when he's on the ice. I just don't see him as this tremendous play-driving center. To me, he's going to be more of that sort of run and gun, barrel down the ice, uses his good straight line speed to create chances. Sort of your power forward type, but more versatile offensively, where he's got equal playmaking and goal scoring, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. So another player you're probably pretty familiar with. I ranked him 31st. He was picked 33rd by Montreal. So early in the second round, Owen Beck. What's your take on? Give me your skinny on Beck.
Oh, well, Beck is very simply he's Shane Wright, but the Walmart version. So he is though. He you talk about a defensively responsible center with decent playmaking, decent skating in terms of agility, but not the best straight line speed. Very high ceiling. Most definitely, at the very least, a third line center, but will probably be a very good sort of middle six center. So yeah, Shane Wright, but the light version, in my opinion.
All right, and rounding out my top 32, I have a player who I thought was going to be drafted much later in the draft. So he only bumped up by 4 positions in my fantasy ranking, but if I would have thought that going into the draft, I would have been blown away. I had him as like a 3rd, 4th round pick.
Yep.
And that is mainly because of the Russian factor. But another defenseman rounding out my list, I think that's about 5 defensemen, maybe 6. And it's Artem Duda.
Arizona. I'm first Arizona factor. Let's keep that in mind. But also, I am not a big fan of Artem Duda. I had him 83rd overall in my personal rankings. There are multiple defensemen that I'd look at before him. Obviously, he's got great offensive upside because he's very skilled in terms of, his play with the puck, but he's just so lost without it that I think it'll be more of a liability than anything. I think he'll, like, if he's rounded out properly, probably a second pair defenseman on the offensive side, second power play unit type thing. But I mean, there are multiple players that we haven't mentioned yet that I would definitely consider ahead of him. Let me think real quick. I've got a couple here. Owen Pickering, we haven't talked about at all. And I think he would be a decent option in this range. I mean, he was picked really high, and I've got my reservations about him. He's very, very lanky and needs to put on a lot of weight. But offensively, I think he's more skilled than Duda, and he's got a more projectable frame. So I don't know. There's a couple of guys that I look at way before Duda. I wouldn't touch this player before maybe the 70s or 80s.
Fair enough. I like the fact that he scored 14 goals and 41 points in 52 games. Admittedly,
that is impressive.
I don't really watch MHL games, so I hadn't really had an eye test on this player. I'm just going by a couple other scouting reports that I read about him. A couple guys are like very high on him, and then I look at his stat line and I think, I could see why someone might be interested in that. Now, but
he's a complete liability.
All right, fair enough. Now, there are some players who were picked in the first round that didn't get ranked. That would be Lian Bichsel, Owen Pickering, and Sam Rinzel. So Bichsel, I didn't rank him in my fantasy rankings because I think he's got a little bit of a Logan Stanley factor to him. Owen Pickering, who you were just talking positively about, I know I like his development that he had this year. I just think he's just too long-term of a prospect. And I'm not sure about the offensive upside, right? Like Artem Duda is a long-term prospect to be sure as well. But I think, that you're swinging at the fences here with this player.
Definitely.
And if he hits hard. So Owen Pickering is definitely a safer pick. But I just don't think he's got the lottery pick capabilities that you're going to get with Duda. The other player who was ranked, not ranked by me, that was a first round pick was Sam Rinzel.
Yeah, I think he's definitely worth a look. I had him 29th overall in my personal rankings, so I'm decently high on him. He's very rangy, very skilled for a big guy, 6'4", 180 pounds. So like he's got some weight to put on as well. He's not done with his development. More of a longer term project. He's probably going to play a good 2-3 years in the NCAA before he sees a second of NHL ice time. But if you're patient with him, he could pay off big. I don't think he's going to be a proper top pair defenseman, but in the 30 to 40 range, you're starting to look at those middle pairing guys that are going to put up big minutes and play on both units, both special team units. So that's exactly the type of guy you should go for.
Yeah, a couple other guys didn't make the rankings. Maverick Lamoureux, Reed Schaefer, Ryan Chesley. They're all kind of considerations. So right in this area. But Zoom's kicking me out in about a minute here, Hadi. So I'm going to have to wrap this episode up. I hope you had as much fun talking about these guys as I did. I hope people who listened to this enjoyed it and were able to glean a couple of gems of information and help them with ranking their fantasy prospects for their upcoming drafts. Be sure to get the Dauber Prospects Draft Guide and the Prospect Report. You can get a lot of information on all these players in the Prospect Guide. And I also recommend the McKean's Yearbook. I contributed to that. It's a long-standing publication, and there's a couple of good articles in there about late sleepers for your fantasy league. Just saying. So, Hadi, tell us where our listeners can find you on Twitter and where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube at Hadi Kalakeche, NHL Draft Scouting. So my full name, NHL Draft.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I received a call. And you can find me on Twitter at HadiK_Scouting. Very responsive there. Sorry about that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I'd be more than happy to help out.
Right on. Thanks very much, Hadi. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the show, give me a follow on Twitter at Farling, at DPR_show, and give the show a 5-star review. That'd be super awesome. Till then, keep your stick on the ice.
Take care.